My name's Adam Purdy. I am just one of the campus ministers here at Northwest. I just want to welcome you. Thank you for being here. Really excited to hear what Frank has to say tonight. And so just some quick little things on the front end and some logistics is first of all, just want to thank First Baptist for kind of taking some initiative and inviting Frank to be here, and then just thank you to the many churches here in Maryville for the financial support and even just being here. It's really significant that the churches can just work together to continue to learn and things like that. And so for those of you who don't know this is Frank's third time here in the last, I don't know how many years, 6 years, something like that. And the first 2 times he was here, he talked about the topic of, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And tonight, he's going to kind of answer the question, if God, then why evil? And so I'm excited for that. Just some brief logistics. At the very end, there's going to be a Q&A. And so be thinking of questions as he's speaking. Maybe you already have some. And so he will seek to answer those. Additionally, there's going to be a QR code survey at the end, and every person, just to give some feedback, things that you learned, things like that. And any person who fills that out will be entered to win a $50 gift card. So, double incentive. And then just a brief note about your phones. I know we all take notes on our phones, right? Every single one of us. No, not all of us. But if you are taking notes on your phone, that's fine. Please make sure that the sound is off because we all are listening and wanting to learn tonight. So, really excited you guys are here. Really excited that Frank's here. So let's welcome him up.
Good evening, Bearcats. Some of you have experienced tremendous pain and suffering even though you claim to be a Christian. Some of you have experienced abuse. Some of you have seen your parents divorce. Some of you have had family members that have passed away, maybe even a brother or a sister. Some of you were bullied in school. Some of you got involved in drugs and alcohol. Some of you right now are addicted to pornography. And in every single instance, if you're a Christian or just a believer in God in general, you prayed that God would take this pain and suffering away from you, and He said no. And just 2 weeks ago, Israeli mothers and fathers put their kids down to bed, said a prayer that their kids would be safe, and terrorists came across the border and mutilated them. And these are God's chosen people. Yeah, my question is, where was God when all these things occurred? When they occurred to you? When they occurred in Israel? When they occurred during the Holocaust? Where was God? Is it possible that the God you pray to doesn't really exist? I mean, why wouldn't He stop these things? Children brutalized, murdered, sexually abused, children with bone cancer. Where is this God? And if this God does exist, why would you worship Him? Because He's a pretty brutal God. In fact, the great atheist Richard Dawkins, in the book The God Delusion, said this: basically that God is evil. He said, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. And those are his good qualities. I mean, if you just take a cursory view of the Old Testament, it's kind of hard to disagree with Dawkins. I mean, what's all this business about killing the Canaanites? This is a good God. If this God does exist, why would you worship him? Sorry for that cheery opening. But let me ask you a question. What if your best arguments to doubt God show that he actually exists? What if your best arguments to say there is no God actually provide evidence that there is a God? Because that's my thesis here tonight. Because there is so much evil and suffering in the world, it does cause us to question God, but I'm going to argue actually that the presence of evil and suffering in the world is actually proof there is a God. In fact, I think when atheists argue there is no God, they're actually stealing from God to argue against him. In fact, in the book, Stealing from God, we have an acronym, CRIMES, C-R-I-M-E-S, and each one of these letters stand for a different aspect of reality that atheists often say show that God doesn't exist, when in fact none of these things would exist unless God existed. They're causality, reason, information, morality, evil, and science. These are often put forth as arguments against God. In my view, these are actually arguments for God, and the only one we have time to cover tonight is this issue of evil, which is a pretty big issue. And they're from the book Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. So what we're going to try and do here tonight is do three things, or cover this topic in three basic questions. The first question is, does evil disprove God? Because you often hear people saying, if there's evil in the world, there can't be a good God. Or if he is a good God, he's just not powerful enough to overcome this evil. The second argument, or the second question I should say, that we need to cover is, if evil doesn't disprove God, what's the purpose of evil? And then we're going to deal with the question directly, what is God's solution to evil? These are the 3 points we're going to try and cover tonight. And then, as Adam said, we're going to do Q&A. Actually, that's not technically right. Instead of Q&A tonight, I think we'll do all Q, no A. All right? Everyone gets to ask a question, takes all the pressure off me. No, we'll have Q&A a little bit later, and there's people out watching in internet land. They'll be able to hear the Q&A because we have microphones here for that. Now, before I get into this, I need to point something out. If you're going through a period right now of fairly intense pain and suffering, what I'm about to say may not resonate. Why? Because when you're in pain and suffering, you don't need a philosopher. You need a pastor. You need somebody to come alongside you. You don't need somebody to give you answers. You need somebody to give you comfort. So what we need to remember is, when we're going through pain and suffering, that pain and suffering or evil is a problem not just for the head, but also for the heart. So it might not resonate, but I think that the first step back to recovery, if you're going through difficulty right now, is for you to intellectually know that despite the fact you're going through pain and suffering, there is a God and he has a reason for what you're going through, even if you never discover this side of eternity what that reason is. So, we're going to start right here at point 1. Does evil disprove God? You guys ready to go? You guys ready to go? All right, good. I think whenever you try and address a big issue like that, you've got to get some context. And I want to put on the screen here arguments for and against God. I'm going to list a number of arguments on the left side of the screen. And these arguments are covered in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We don't have time to go into detail on them. We've done that here at this university before. I'm just going to list them just to give us some context. The beginning of the universe, I think, shows that there is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial creator. The fine-tuning of the universe shows that this creator is supremely intelligent. The information found in DNA, the 3.5 billion letter software program in every one of your 40 trillion cells, shows that there's a mind out there. Life itself appears to be the product of intelligence. Consciousness and free will, your ability to make free choices, and the very fact that you can ascertain things outside of your skull and draw conclusions about it, seem to point back to a mind. Also, intelligence and reason, the very fact that you can reason, that there are these laws of logic that you can apprehend and use to find things out that are actually true about the real world. That's better explained by some immaterial mind than just molecules bumping into one another, which is what atheists say. The laws of nature themselves, some atheists are known to say everything is run by the laws of nature. Well, where did the laws of nature come from? And why are they so precise and consistent? Laws appear to come from lawgivers. Also, objective morality. We'll talk more about that in this session. Old Testament prophecy and the resurrection and other miracles of Jesus. If those really happened, this is evidence that God does exist. What's the biggest argument against God? It's normally the problem of evil. If there is a good God, and he's done all these things, why does he allow children to suffer? Why does he allow his so-called chosen people to suffer? Why do you suffer? Why do you suffer when maybe you're living a more moral life than somebody else who isn't, and isn't even a believer, and they prosper? Why is that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, is this actually an argument against God, evil? This is the interactive portion of the program. No, evil is not actually an argument against God. Ironically, it's an argument for God. Why? Because evil, objective evil, presupposes objective good, and objective good requires God. You say, what are you talking about, Frank? Why does the existence of evil show that there must be good, and why does good show there must be God? Well, many years ago in World War I, there was a soldier in World War I by the name of C.S. Lewis. You've probably heard of him. And Lewis saw his best friend die in that awful war. And he came out of the war going, there can't be a good God. There's too much injustice or injustice in the world. How can I believe in a good God? Later, after talking to J.R.R. Tolkien, the author, of course, of Lord of the Rings and many other works, Lewis and Tolkien and some other men were in a group they called the Inklings. They would get together and talk about what they were writing. And Tolkien ultimately convinced Lewis that there was a God. And Lewis later wrote in the book Mere Christianity this epiphany that he had regarding evil. Here's what he said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be not right unless something is right. Something can't be immoral unless something is moral. Because evil does not exist on its own. Evil is a parasite. Evil is a lack in a good thing. It can't exist on its own. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto, right? You got nothing. Evil is like a hole in a garment, right? A moth-eaten hole. What is a completely moth-eaten garment? It's a hanger. It doesn't exist anymore, right? Or you could look at it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In other words, in order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. In order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. By the way, this is why any malevolent force out there is not an equal force to the good force, God. Because you can't think of any being that is completely evil. Even Satan, if he exists, and of course as Christians we believe he does, and you believe he does too, just look at the news, okay? Satan has good qualities. What are the qualities? Well, he's got mind, emotion, and will. He just uses those qualities for evil. But metaphysically, he's good. You can't think of a completely evil being. They have to steal from good in order to exist at all. So, there can't be evil unless there's good, and there can't be good unless God exists. Now, you might be surprised to find that even the most prominent atheists agree with this. Again, this is Richard Dawkins, who believes in atheistic materialism. What's atheistic materialism? You don't really have a mind, you just have a brain. You don't really have a soul, you just have a body. You might think you have free will, but you don't. Because every thought and every decision you make is completely driven by the laws of physics. You're just a molecular machine. You're a moist robot, according to atheistic materialists now. And according to this view, here is the outcome. This is what Dawkins says. He says, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt and other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. There is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. I love the way Dawkins writes. He's a very good writer. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. You're just dancing to your DNA. You're not really making free will choices. So when you go home and you go home with bad grades, and you just go to your parents and go, I'm just dancing to my DNA, right? I had no choice in this. Now, you might look at this. You might look at this and notice something. This quote, I mean, he's right if atheistic materialism is true, that there is no justice, but isn't this the same guy who said this? That God is unjust? Where's he getting the standard of justice from? He just got done telling us there is no justice, and yet he's claiming that the God of the Old Testament is unjust. You know where he's getting it from? He's stealing it from God. He's assuming a standard that he doesn't have in his worldview. If we're just molecular machines, there's no purpose to life. There's no right or wrong, which means there's no right or wrong way to live it. Murdering babies is not objectively worse than loving babies in the long run. It's just your opinion if there is no God. In fact, probably for you Christians in here, you get an objection to Christianity more than any other. What objection do you get? What do non-believers say about you? What do they say? You're a hypocrite. You're a judgmental hypocrite. When someone says that to you, what should you say? You know, you're right. But you know what you've just done? You've just given an argument for God. Why? Why is hypocrisy wrong if there is no God? That's just your opinion. Why is anything wrong if there is no God? Now, maybe you're not a Christian and you're in here and you're just curious to see what's going on. Thank you for being here. But maybe you're not a Christian because somebody in the church has wronged you. Maybe you know a Christian who claims to be a Christian and they're really jerks. That happens, right? Well, Dr. John Dixon, an historian from down under, asks you to consider this question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven, right? You blame the player. So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. Look, just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. I don't play Jesus well. But if I played him perfectly, I wouldn't even need a Savior. If I was perfect, I wouldn't need a Savior. For you Christians in here, you've been told that you can't get to heaven by being good. That's false. You can get to heaven by being good. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? Really, we don't need a Savior if we're not fallen. But we are fallen. That's why we need a Savior. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this guy, David Berlinski. David Berlinski is an agnostic who teaches at the University of Paris, I believe. He lives in Paris, between Paris and the U.S. He goes back and forth. He wrote this book called The Devil's Delusion, which is really a response to the God delusion. Even though he's not a believer, he just realizes that a lot of the things Dawkins and his other colleagues say are just false. And one of the things he points out is that a lot of people will say Christians have done a lot of evil in the world. Religious people have done a lot of evil in the world. That's true. However, when you really look at the amount of evil done by Christians compared to the rest of the world, it's not very much. In fact, here's what Berlinski says in the book about this issue. He says, just who has imposed on the suffering human race poison gas, barbed wire, high explosives, experiments in eugenics, the formula for Zyklon B, that's what they use in the gas chambers, heavy artillery, pseudo-scientific justifications for mass murder, cluster bombs, attack submarines, bad projectors, napalm, intercontinental ballistic missiles, military space platforms, and nuclear weapons. If memory serves, it was not the Vatican. Yeah, religious people have done evil things. That's true. By the way, it's true, but compared to all the evil done in the world, what percentage of wars are caused by religion? According to the Encyclopedia of War. Does anyone know? 7%. That's right. You get an extra star next to your name. 7% of wars are caused by religion. If you take Islam out, it's 3%. In fact, just think of the last century. Think of the major wars. World War I, caused by religion? No. World War II, caused by religion? No. Korean War, caused by religion? No. Vietnam War, caused by religion? No. Gulf War, caused by religion? No. Saddam wanted the oil. Most conflicts are not caused by religion, and yet that's all you hear. Now, this doesn't prove Christianity's true and atheism's false. I'm simply trying to show you the myth that what's out there, Christianity could be false and atheism's true. I'm just trying to show you that what people often say, oh, all this problem is caused by religion, is just false. You know, the truth of the matter is, if you want to kill somebody, you'll find any justification to do so. Atheists killed 100 million people in the last century. From Pol Pot to Stalin to Hitler. Oh, Hitler was a Christian. Oh, really? You think Hitler was a Christian? I hear people say that. Tell me more. Hitler was worshiping a Jew? You really think that's true? Tell me more. The point here is that evil is in the hearts of all of us, but religious people are normally not the ones causing most wars out there. Now, a number of years ago, I had the opportunity to debate Christopher Hitchens. You guys remember Christopher Hitchens? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And you can see these debates on our YouTube channel. Anyway, he wrote this book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And in our second debate, this is a picture from our second debate at the College of New Jersey. I said, Christopher, a lot of what you say in your book is true. Religious people have done evil things. But you know what? First of all, you don't have a standard by which to judge that. And secondly, you're proving our worldview. We all agree we've done evil. That's why we need a Savior. And when people say, I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. I mean, we're all hypocrites. That's why we need a Savior. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need one. And by the way, religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. But again, if I could and did, I wouldn't need a Savior. Neither would you. Do you realize that Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity? Jesus does everything for you. You just accept it. If you have to achieve your identity, all the pressure's on you, and there's always somebody that can do it better. And you can lose that identity. You can't lose Jesus if Jesus is who he said he is. Your identity is secure as a child of God once you accept the free gift he offers you. So, let's sum up this section. The existence of evil doesn't indicate the absence of God from the world, but the absence of him from our lives. There is evil in the world, but it doesn't disprove God. It shows that God does exist. In fact, go back to our chart we started with. I think we need to move evil to this side because it actually shows that God does exist. I know this is going to sound odd, but if evil exists, God exists. Not because God is doing evil, but because God is the standard by which we'd even know what evil was. Evil does not disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it can't disprove God because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. So that's point one. Now let's take a look at point two. What's the purpose of evil? A number of years ago, I was at Michigan State University, and I had gone through the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist presentation. And there was a pretty hardcore atheist in the room. I knew it because he sat through the entire 2-hour presentation looking like this. I mean, he didn't crack a smile once, and I had some pretty good jokes in there. All right. So when it was time for the Q&A, his hand was shot up. He was on this side of the room. And we weren't streaming it back then. This is probably 15 years ago. And so he just shot his hand up. I said, yes, sir. He said, if there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? I said, sir, that is an excellent question. Maybe because if he did, he might start with you and me, because we do evil every day. You ever notice when we start complaining about evil, we always start complaining about somebody else doing it? We always say, hey, God, why don't you stop him? Or God, why don't you stop her? We never say, God, why don't you stop me? In fact, ladies and gentlemen, if God were to stop evil at midnight tonight, would you still be alive at 12:01? I wouldn't be. But I said to him, sir, that is a great question, and we don't have time to go into a lot of depth on it. But I do want to show you a 1 minute and 46-second video that won't give you a complete answer, but it'll give you a good doorway to an answer. So I showed him this video, and I'm going to show it to you now. There's a lot going on in 1 minute and 46 seconds. You really got to pay attention. Are you ready? All right, we need sound for this back there. You ready? Here we go. You getting it back there? Hold on. Stand by for vectors, Victor. Call for clearance, Clarence. Roger, Roger. It somehow changed off HDMI, but we're back. So stand by. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Is God good? If he is, why is there suffering and evil? Let's assume for the moment that God is all-powerful. This means that God can do anything that is logically possible. So he can create galaxies and subatomic particles and rainforests and you. But God cannot do what is logically impossible. He cannot make a square circle or a one-ended stick. So can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it? No. So what if, when God created human beings, he wanted them to be free? Freedom's a good thing, but if humans are to be free, they cannot be forced to obey God. Because freedom without choice is like a square circle. It's a logical contradiction. No choice, no freedom. God didn't want robots. He wanted real people. The first humans endowed with the awesome power of free choice abused their freedom. The tragic consequences of their bad choice and our bad choices ripple across the world. God is responsible for the fact of freedom, but humans are responsible for their acts of freedom. But let's remember, we don't suffer alone. God will put an end to suffering and evil. And God became a man to suffer with us. God is good, and he wants real people like you to know him, but the free choice is yours.
Now, if you want to see more videos like that on our YouTube channel, there's about 1,800 of them. They're not all kinetic videos. There's a lot of Q&A videos up there. That one was put together by Jim Zangmeister, who's a brilliant artist who graduated from our seminary, Southern Evangelical Seminary, ses.edu. Great place to learn about this stuff. In any event, Jim has done many videos like this. And here's kind of the bottom line to that video. Evil exists because we have free will, which is the only way love and moral choices could exist. You can't love if you don't have free will. You can't make moral choices if you don't have free will. So God has given us free will to allow us to love. The problem is, with free will, you can also do evil. And so God has given us this ability to make this a moral world. This is not a robot kind of world. He wanted a world where people could make free will choices. So I showed that video at Michigan State that night. How do you think the atheist looked after I showed it? He looked like this. He said, okay, that explains some of it, free will, but it can't explain all of it. I mean, like, why do babies die? They didn't do anything wrong. I said, sir, that's a great question, and since we've just gone through the evidence for Christianity being true, I'm going to refer to the New Testament in order to answer that question. Because if there is no God, there's no purpose to life, and if there's no purpose to life, you can't find a purpose for why bad things happen. In fact, you can't even define them as good or bad. They're just different if there is no standard. So I said, what's the purpose of life? By the way, what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? What does that mean, glorify God? What does that even mean? And by the way, where does it say that in the Bible? That's the Westminster Confession, you Calvinists. I'm not saying it's false, but what does that even mean to glorify God? How does a baby dying glorify God? I think Jesus gives us the answer to what the purpose of life is. When he's praying for us in John 17, he says this, "This is eternal life, that they," meaning us, "may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you've sent." The purpose of God is to know God not just intellectually, but personally, and then to make him known when you add the Great Commission to this. To know God and to make him known. That's why we're here. Here's the problem. Knowing and growing in God often requires pain. In fact, it was C.S. Lewis who famously said this: God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to arouse a deaf world. Sometimes you only look up when you're on your back. You don't even care about anything but your pleasure when things are going well. What happens when things go wrong? Suddenly you start going, I need some help here. In fact, the scriptures talk about this quite a bit. We can't cover it all. This is a very short little seminar here. But James says this, that suffering develops character. He says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Time out. What Christian in here counts it all joy when things go wrong? I don't. Do you? But that's what James says. You know who James was, by the way? The half-brother of Jesus who wrote that little book in the New Testament called? You guys are sharp tonight. Yeah. James was martyred. James was thrown off the Temple Mount by the Sanhedrin in 62 AD, and then he was stoned to death. And the New Testament documents don't tell us this. You know who tells us this? Josephus, the Jewish historian who was probably in Jerusalem at the time. He lived from 37 AD to about 100 AD. He tells us this, as well as another writer, Hegesippus, who lived later. James, as the pastor of the church in Jerusalem, is martyred by the Jewish authorities. And he's the guy saying, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Why? Because knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Paul says this in the great book of Romans, we also glory in tribulation. Time out. Who in here glories in tribulation? When things really go bad, you go, yeah. Nobody does that. This is what Paul is saying, though. Look forward, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. So when you go through pain and suffering and evil, it's going to bring about a greater good. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. What would happen if you got everything you wanted every time? Things always went well for you. No matter what you did, things went your way. What would happen to you? What do we call children who get everything they want? Spoiled, right? This is what would happen to me if I got everything I wanted every time. I would be already more of a moral monster than I already am. I need difficulty in my life. I need people to say no. I need obstacles. Otherwise, it's just going to become more and more about me. This is why, by the way, celebrities often turn out to be very shallow and selfish people, because nobody ever says no to them. People fawn all over them. They never get no. There's no obstacles put in their way. You don't want that kind of life, because it's going to make you a very shallow, selfish person who, once your fame wears off, you're probably going to be addicted, broken, and alone. You need difficulty. You need things not to go your way if you're going to grow. In fact, Jesus himself was said to learn obedience through suffering. Jesus, the one who never sinned, learned obedience through suffering. If he learned obedience through suffering, what about us? Sounds like we need it too. In fact, there are some virtues that can only be developed through evil and trial. It's really hard to develop courage without danger, or perseverance without obstacles, or compassion without suffering. It's hard to develop patience without tribulation. I'm a very impatient person. I've been praying for patience for quite a while, and frankly, I'm getting tired of waiting for it. By the way, never pray for patience. Why? Everything's going to go wrong that day, right? No matter what line you get in, it's going to be the longest, slow, and moving line. Your car's going to, the transmission's going to fall out. Everything's going to go wrong. Your phone's going to go dead, right? Everything's going to go wrong, but that's the way you learn patience. Also, no character without adversity, and it's really hard to find or to develop faith or trust without need. Faith means trust. Faith doesn't mean blindly following something. Faith means trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. Trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. In fact, I was just reading something by C.S. Lewis last night who made this point. He said, trust is necessary when you don't have complete information. And guess what? None of us have complete information. But if there's someone in your life who you know well enough to trust, it's because you know their character. You know something about them. In fact, I was telling my colleague Clint here, who runs all this and streams all this for us, we both got to the airport at Charlotte this morning, and I knew he was going to show up. Why? Because of his character. I didn't have complete information. I didn't even know where he was, but I knew he was going to show up because of his character. And if I had said, after doing this together for probably 10 years, if I didn't trust him after 10 years of him being trustworthy, what does that say about me? But I don't have complete information. And by the way, none of us have complete information about ultimate reality. If God does exist, we don't have complete information about him. If God doesn't exist, we don't have complete information about him not existing. You can't prove God doesn't exist. No matter what position you're in, you've got to have some trust. But sometimes difficulty will help you do that. You've heard it before. It's trite, but it's true. No pain, no gain. Actually, that doesn't go far enough. The real truth is more pain, more gain. And the Apostle Paul, who went through a lot of difficulty himself, points this out at the end of a passage in the second book of Corinthians, chapter 4. He says this, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." In other words, you have to have an eternal perspective. You can't always see what's going to happen when difficulty besets you. But you have to have enough trust to say, even though I can't figure out what's going on, I can trust God that ultimately this is going to work out for my own good. Maybe not what I want in this life, but ultimately it's going to work out for good. That's another passage we'll talk about here in a minute. Now, I don't know how to communicate this any more than give you a kind of a trivial sports analogy. But what I think he's saying here is this. Imagine some quarterback who is maligned on his team. The fans don't like him. His teammates don't like him. He's never going to amount to anything. And then one year he has a good year and he gets his team all the way to the Super Bowl and he beats a superior team in the Super Bowl. He holds up the Lombardi trophy. So does the third string quarterback who didn't play a down all year. Question, do you think the maligned quarterback enjoyed holding up the Lombardi trophy more so than the third string quarterback? Yeah, why? Because he was actually in the game. He actually went through all the pain and suffering, all the difficulty, all the people who said he couldn't do it, all the injuries that he had to play through. So when he went through all that difficulty, he enhanced his capacity to enjoy the reward. The third string quarterback enjoyed it, but not to the same level as the quarterback who went through all the pain and suffering. It appears to me this is what Paul is saying, that our light and momentary troubles here enhance your capacity to enjoy the reward later. If you don't go through difficulty, you're going to be a very thin, shallow, and probably selfish person. This is why James says, count it all joy. This is why Paul says, we glory in tribulation, because we know the payoff. In fact, suffering will bring a greater good. This passage is often quoted out of context, not here though. This is from the great book of Romans. Paul says, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose, to be conformed to the image of his Son. By the way, notice he doesn't say all things are good. He says all things work together for good. There's a lot of evil out there. And the ultimate goal for God is for you to be conformed to the image of his Son. And that's going to take some refining. That's going to take some difficulty. So, I explained this. We're still at Michigan State. I explained this in a shorter period of time to the group at Michigan State. How do you think the atheist looked after that? He still looked like this. He said that still doesn't explain it all. How could any good come from, say, a baby dying? And some of you who are Christians have been to churches where a baby gets sick, the entire congregation prays, and the baby dies anyway. And everybody goes, what? Why? How could any good come from that? So when he said, how could any good come from that? I said to him, how do you know there's no good coming from it? Do you know there's no good coming from it? I mean, think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. If life ends right here, yeah, there is a lot of pain and suffering that appears to have no payoff. But what if life doesn't end there? What if life continues into eternity? What then? Is it possible that things that occur in this life not only have a payoff in this life later, but actually may have a payoff in eternity? In fact, I struggled with this issue for a long time. Why would a good God allow a baby to die? Or a missionary, he goes over to Africa, he's about to get set up, and he gets speared to death. You go, what? He's over there trying to spread the gospel, and he's killed before he starts. How does that make any sense? Well, the thing that helped me understand how good can come from it, even though I can't see it, is something called the ripple effect. Have you guys heard of the ripple effect? The ripple effect says that everything that occurs in this life ripples forward to affect trillions of other events. I mean, you can think about the ripple effect in your own life. Just think about why you're sitting here right now. For you to even be alive, your parents needed to meet. And then their parents needed to meet prior to that. And their parents needed to meet. You get the idea. Think about all the ripples that occurred for you to even be sitting here right now. Can you trace all those ripples? I don't care if you've got ancestry. No, you can't trace it all. You can't trace all the decisions and all the events that occurred that brought you to this place tonight, because there are ripples that we can't see. So when someone asks me, why does a baby die? I say, I don't know why that baby died, but I know why babies die in general, because we live in a fallen world. But maybe this baby dying here is going to ripple forward through a series of events to say 500 years from now, bring forth a great evangelist that's going to save millions of people. Can I trace all those ripples? Of course I can't. I got a pea-sized brain here, and I only can see so much, and I'm stuck in time. But if there's a being outside of time that sees the end from the beginning, that being can see how every event ripples forward to work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. Notice he doesn't say it doesn't work to good for everyone, because some people don't want the good. In fact, you can even see this ripple effect in some stories in the Old Testament. You guys remember Joseph and his brothers? Joseph is sold into slavery. By the way, who's he sold into slavery by? Judah, the fourth oldest. And who did Judah ultimately bring forth? The Messiah, Jesus. Jesus is in the bloodline of Judah, a really bad guy. In fact, there's a lot of bad people in the bloodline of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, right? You know, all these embarrassing people in the bloodline. There are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline, Rahab and Tamar. Do you think Matthew put down the genealogy, said, you know what, I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes. No! But he's just telling the truth. Why? Because they're not making this up. This is an embarrassing detail they wouldn't have invented if they were making it up. In any event, I digress. Joseph is sold into slavery, and he has an awful time in Egypt for a while. He's falsely accused. He's thrown into prison, all this. And then he works his way to the second or third in power in Egypt. He puts a whole bunch of grain aside, and then there's a famine in the land. And the very family that sold him into slavery leave Israel to escape the famine. They come to Egypt, and Joseph recognizes them. And what does he do when he recognizes them? You dirty rats, you're going to pay for what you did to me. No, he doesn't say that. What does he say? This is what he says. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. In other words, he could see the ripple effect. The very people that did evil, that evil rippled forward to actually help them later. Most of the time, you can't see the ripple effect. Here they could. The bottom line is this: while respecting free choice, God can bring good from evil. In fact, one of the most profound things ever said on this topic was said by a Roman Catholic priest in Notre Dame in Paris about 150 years ago. And before I tell you what he said, let's set up the problem. Atheists will often say, if God is all-loving and all-powerful, why does evil exist? Because if he's all-loving, he'd stop evil. And if he's all-powerful, or if he's all-loving, he'd want to stop evil. And if he's all-powerful, he would stop evil. But since evil still exists, he's either not all-loving or not all-powerful or not both. But this problem leaves out a very important attribute of God. What's the attribute that's left out? Yes, God is all-loving and all-powerful. What they're leaving out is God is also all-wise. He's all-knowing. And he might have reasons for allowing evil to occur. In fact, here's what this Roman Catholic priest said about this topic. He said, if God would concede me his power for 24 hours, you would see how many changes I would make in the world. But if he gave me his wisdom too, I would leave things as they are. God can see the ripples. We can't. Now, about this point, we're still at Michigan State, by the way. At this point, there's a guy maybe sitting about 5 seats away from the atheist, and he raises his hand. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, I know of a woman who was raped, and the rape nearly destroyed her. And she actually got pregnant as a result of this rape. His voice starts to crack. And he said, but this woman decided that she was not going to punish the baby for the sin of the father. She decided she was going to bring this baby to term. And this baby was a boy. By this time, he's crying in front of everybody. And this boy grew up to be a man who was a pastor. And this pastor has helped bring a lot of people to Jesus and has helped disciple a lot of people in Jesus. And he said, that baby boy grew up to be me. And then he looked over at the atheist and he said, if my mom can bring good from evil, so can God. And I said, you're dismissed. I mean, like what else could I say after that? The guy had a real-world illustration of what I was trying to communicate. So, as soon as I dismissed the crowd, how do you think the atheist looked? He ran out of the room. Literally, he got up and he ran out the back. But I went up to the pastor. I said, hey, what's your name? He said, my name's Gary Bingham. I'm a pastor in Marion, Indiana. He drove up to Lansing that night. And he said, I said, well, how's your mom? And he said, well, she's a lot better now than she was 4 years ago, because 4 years ago she became a Christian. And I said, well, obviously your mom is a hero. And that good thing she did in the face of evil rippled forward to help all those people you helped. And it's still rippling forward because all the people here at Michigan State tonight heard the same story. And it's still rippling forward. Why? Because you're hearing it. And it's also in the book, Stealing from God. It keeps rippling. So if we can turn or bring good from evil, can God? Of course. So, evil doesn't disprove God. God has many purposes of evil to make us more like Jesus. Gives us free will. And the free will, of course, can bring forth evil, but also good. But now the ultimate question is, what's God's solution to evil? What is the solution? What is he ultimately going to do with this? And let me ask you, Chris, this is just for the Christians in here. Christians, I want to ask you this question. Does God promise to protect Christians from evil and suffering? Where do we get the idea that Christians aren't supposed to suffer? Where do we get that? Why do we think that God somehow doesn't exist if things don't go my way? In fact, let me ask you guys a question. What is the common thread running through all these biblical characters? Close. They're not all martyred, but they all experienced tremendous pain and suffering. Abraham, Joseph, Moses, David, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Job, John the Baptist, Stephen, James, the brother of John, James, the brother of Jesus, John, Peter, Paul, and even Jesus himself paid the ultimate price, and he never even did anything wrong. You know, there's this very pernicious theology out there called the word of faith theology. You know, if you're not healthy and wealthy, it's because you don't have enough faith. What a bunch of bunk that is. Let me ask you, it's easy to refute. Let me ask you this question. The apostles and Jesus himself died brutal deaths. Are you telling me they didn't have enough faith? That's madness. No, Jesus actually said that if they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. And you're going to have trouble in this world. But take heart, I've overcome the world. And the Apostle Paul said, anyone who lives a faithful life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. He didn't say maybe. And if you haven't been persecuted yet and you're a Christian, it might be because nobody knows you're a Christian. Jesus said, when people insult you and persecute you on account of me, rejoice because your reward in heaven is great. Yet too many Christians are just worried about being comfortable. I'm going to keep my head down so nobody will be mad at me. Yeah, if you're upset with the state of the world, go home and look in the mirror because you've been keeping your head down. You haven't been speaking the truth. Remember, this earth is not heaven yet. It will be. A new heaven and new earth are going to be created ultimately. But it's not heaven yet. So, what's God's ultimate solution? God suffered himself. In fact, you know what the Christian story is? The Christian story is the answer to the problem of evil. If there was no evil, Jesus would not have to come. If we never sinned, we wouldn't need Jesus. Christianity is the answer to the problem of pain and suffering in every worldview, whether you're an atheist, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, New Ager, whatever you are, you have to answer the problem of evil if you're going to be consistent, if you're going to be coherent. Jesus comes and he takes evil on himself. Christianity is the answer to the problem of evil. His pain can be our gain. Why do I say can be? Because if you don't want his sacrifice, you don't have to take it. Now, in fact, I was at the University of Michigan, the other college there up in Michigan. This had to be 12, 15 years ago again. I was debating an atheist by the name of Eddie Tabash, a Beverly Hills attorney. And at one point in the debate, he asked me this question. He said, Frank, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. She lived a life full of pain and suffering. Toward the end of her life, somebody offered her the gospel, But she rejected it, and then she died. Is she in hell right now? Basically, he's asking the question, would a loving God send you to hell? Why would a loving God do that? So I said, Eddie, I don't know where your mother is now. I don't know if she had a deathbed conversion or not. But if she didn't accept Christ before she died, then God is too loving to force her into heaven against her will. You see, the assumption behind the question is everybody wants to go to heaven. That is not true. Who's in heaven? Jesus is in heaven. You know, there have been people running from Jesus their entire lives. What's he going to do in the afterlife? Go, hey, where are you going? You're with me now. How would that be loving? You go, wait a minute, Frank. What's this business about hell, though? Why send him to hell? Well, I asked the University of Michigan audience, the ladies in the audience, this question. So I'm just going to ask it to you guys here. Ladies, this is a question just for you. Here's the question. Ladies, have you ever had a young man pursue you whom you did not want to date? Some are going, yeah, and he's sitting next to me right now. He will not leave me alone. Whenever I ask that question, the ladies always giggle and the men look at their shoes. They're like, is she looking at me right now? Well, ladies, suppose this man keeps asking you out, he keeps asking you out, he keeps asking you out, and you finally say, now look, I like you, but only as a... Ladies, why don't you just stick the knife in and turn it? Every man has heard the dreaded friend rejection. Now, gentlemen, I have a little advice for you. If you ever get the dreaded friend rejection, move on. She's not interested. In fact, I have some shocking news for you. She doesn't even like you as a friend. Ladies, am I right? Come on, ladies. You're just being nice. That's what you're, because if you did like him as a friend, you'd be interested. But you're not. Well, suppose this doesn't deter this guy. He keeps asking you out. He keeps asking. He finally says, look, I love you so much, I'm going to force you to love me. Ladies, run, screaming from the building. Can he force you to love him? No, love by definition must be freely given. So, ladies, if he did love you, what would he do? He would leave you alone. That's what God does for us. He sends us cards, letters, and flowers. He sends us creation. He sends us conscience. He sends us Christ. He may send a missionary. He may send a Bible, a broadcast. In some Muslim countries right now, this is very common now, Jesus is coming to Muslims in dreams, to the point where some Muslim towns have billboards that say, if you've seen the white man in the robe in your dream, call this number. Because they want to know the truth. But if God does all that and you keep saying, no, 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 I don't want you, God will give you up to your own desire. This is what Paul says in Romans chapter 1. That if you continue to suppress the truth about God, to go your own way, God is ultimately going to pull himself away from you, because that's what a loving being does. He doesn't force himself on you, and allows you to go your own way. You're going to be separated from God because you don't want him. You don't want to be with him. That's the point. Look, if there is a God, and there is an afterlife, and there's only two possible destinations. You're either going to be with God in the afterlife or separated from God in the afterlife. That's it. You say, what could be so bad about that? Look, whether you're a Christian or not, you get some of the common grace of God. What's the common grace of God? Everyone experiences, to a certain extent, love, relationships, hope for a future. His rain falls on the just and the unjust. But I want you to imagine a place where there is no hope, where there is no love, where there are no relationships, where there is no future. There's just stone cold, narcissistic self-absorption. That is Washington. No. That is hell. You're separated from the ultimate source of goodness by your own choice. God can't force you to love him, just like that guy can't force you to love him. You've got to make a choice. And if you keep saying no, 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 you've made your choice. C.S. Lewis, of course, said everything well. Here's how he put it. He said, in the end, there are only two kinds of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. So God has solved the problem of evil, but not everybody accepts the problem. Look, in the end, ultimately, hell is a quarantine of evil. That's what it is. God doesn't take away your free will. He just separates himself from you and everybody who has accepted the free gift of salvation. So, people that want to continue to do evil won't interfere with those who just want to be with God and their loved ones. So, let's sum this whole thing up. Does evil disprove God? No, it actually shows God does exist, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. What's the purpose of evil? God can use evil to bring forth good in our own character and through other events that ripple forward to bring good ultimately. And God will bring all things together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. And what's God's solution to evil? He actually takes it upon himself, so he doesn't have to punish us. By the way, this is why Jesus is the only way. Jesus is the only way, not because some Christian writer just happened to say, yeah, we're just going to make Jesus the ultimate authority, and whatever he says is what it's going to be. It's just arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. Think about this. Everyone in this room believes in justice. Even if you're not a Christian, you believe in justice. You think justice is something that ought to be done. But if there is no God, there is no justice. It's just your opinion. And there's a lot of things that happen in this world that are unjust and people never pay. The only way justice will ever be done is if there's a being that knows all things and can fix all things in the end. Only God can do that. And if he's infinitely just, which he is, he can't allow any of us to go unpunished. Why? Because we've been unjust. And if he's infinitely just, he has to punish us. But he's also infinitely loving. He doesn't want to punish us. So what does he have to do? He has to punish an innocent substitute in our place so he can remain just and yet allow us to go unpunished. Where's he going to find an innocent substitute? Not in any of us. We're all guilty. He adds humanity to his deity, comes to earth, allows the creatures that tortured and killed him to do so he could take our punishment on himself. And those that do trust in him can therefore have their sins forgiven. And this is why Paul says in his great book of Romans, chapter 3, verse 26, God remains just and is the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. This is why Jesus is the only way. There's no other way an infinitely just being can allow unjust creatures like me and you to go unpunished. Look, you're only going to get two things in the afterlife. You're either going to get justice or you're going to get grace. I don't want justice. You want justice? He came to take justice upon himself, the justice we deserve. Now, there's a lot more in the books. In fact, I want to point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know. First of all, this presentation, as well as many others, is available for free if you just text the word evidence to this phone number, 1-855-909-0582. 1-855-909-0582. Those out there in internet land can do the same thing. We have I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist on the book table there. We also have a 12-part DVD series that goes all of this through about 7 hours. People use it for curriculum, for small groups, for high schools, for Sunday school. That's available back there. The book we talked about tonight is this one, Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. We only talked about one out of about 8 chapters in there, and we didn't cover that completely. So if you want to go further there. There's also a new updated book called Correct, Not Politically Correct. This is about the very controversial issue of same-sex marriage and transgenderism. By the way, there is not a Bible verse in that book. This is not the biblical case on those issues. This is the natural law, medical common sense case that says that same-sex marriage and transgenderism are not good for individuals and they're not good for societies. Particularly the new section on transgenderism, that's why I had to update it. I had to update it because that has really exploded on the scene in the last few years. So that's available out there as well. So there's that number. There's the books and the DVDs. We're now teaching online courses. This week, we're starting a new course. We're going through the book of Galatians, verse by verse, probably the first book Paul ever wrote. And it's absolutely critical because people were trying to start another gospel. They were trying to change the gospel. And Paul stood in the way and said, no, may it be anathema if any of you comes with a new gospel. Even if an angel were to come to you and say, I've got a new gospel, I got a new way of doing this, don't believe him. He said, if I come to you and say that, don't believe me. We can't give up on the gospel, and there's a lot of people out there with new gospels. That's why the book of Galatians is so relevant for today. You can join that course this week if you want. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we've combined these 3 into one social media platform. We call it YouTwitface. Have you guys signed up for YouTwitface yet? Kind of a Jersey thing. We're also on Instagram and TikTok. We have a podcast, the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. Wherever you get podcasts, it's also on radio, but it's easier to listen to it on podcast. We do 2 a week. One drops on Friday afternoon, another drops on Tuesday afternoon. Also, we have a TV show Wednesday nights at, here it'd be 8 p.m. Central Time on DirecTV channel 378 or Roku. Anyone have Roku? Look for NRB TV on Roku. Right now on the show, we're going through the book of Romans. And if you don't do anything else, download the free Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examine. It's got the TV show streaming. It's got the podcast on there. It even has a quick answer section. So if you're a Christian and you're having lunch with a non-Christian and the non-Christian comes up with an objection that you don't know how to answer, all you need to do is take out your iPhone or your Droid and go, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? Got an answer right there. All right. All right, so let's summarize the whole thing. Where was God? Well, God was hanging on a tree to save us from our sins. And let me ask you a question. Do we deserve to suffer less than Jesus? The only perfect human being to ever exist, and he suffered more than probably any of us ever would. We don't deserve any less than he got. And if Jesus grew through suffering, can we? Of course. And he proved that he paid for our sins by rising from the dead. And we could talk about the evidence for that if you want during the Q&A. But before we get to the Q&A, I want you to take a picture of this with your phone because this is going to be a little survey that you can help us improve what we're doing. Everybody got it? Take that little survey. And Adam, if you can come on up here. Where are you, Adam? Come on up here and tell people about Navigators, where you guys meet, when you meet, what you do. We don't want this just to be an event. We want you to get plugged in with other Christians on campus if you're interested in this. Go ahead, Adam.
Hi. So I'm with a group called the Navigators. We are meeting this Thursday at 7 p.m. at the station. And I've kind of tagged some of the different ministries in the room. So if you're one of them, I don't know if it's, maybe you got to come up and chat. I don't know if you can yell from there. But I know Lighthouse meets 7 p.m. on Thursday as well at the Lighthouse. All right. So that's easy to remember. And then Jeremy's coming up.
somebody's behind me. And the lighthouse is up on 4th Street, so if you know where Planet Sub is, you've gone too far for that. And I'm Jeremy. I'm the campus minister with the Christian Campus House. We are right across the street, and our main venue is on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m., so that's tomorrow night.
Yeah, and then my name's Holly. I'm with the Newman Catholic Center on campus. We are right across the street from Maryville Cook, which is where you got your tour at when you were a freshman. And we have our big nights. Wednesday nights at 5 p.m. We start with the rosary. Then we have mass at 5:30 and free dinner for anybody who would like to come at 6 p.m. So, yeah.
And I'm Crystal Dooley, and I'm at the Wesley Center, and we have worship night on Wednesday at 7:30 and supper Thursday night at 6. Sorry.
You got options here.
Yeah, if you didn't get all of that, I'm sure you can follow any of those ministries plus some more on Instagram, etc.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for doing this. Hey, now if anyone has any questions, just come on up to the microphone. We got to use the mic here so people out there in internet land can hear it, and Clint here is going to turn that mic the right way. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking questions.
Yes, sir.
So, lifelong Christian, I do have a question that ties very closely to free will and love. So, you mentioned earlier that in order to for love to exist, we must have free will. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the more difficult things that I've struggled with is in the book of Exodus when Moses is dealing with Pharaoh and getting the people out of Egypt. And so in Exodus 4:21, the Lord's giving Moses instructions. And he goes, and the Lord told Moses, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform all the miracles I've empowered you to do. But I will harden his heart so he will refuse to let people go. And this happens a few other times. So there's a little bit of struggle I have because God's giving, through Moses, he's giving Pharaoh instructions, but he's also turning right around and saying, I'm going to harden his heart. So there does seem to be a little bit of a struggle in terms of whether that's free will or not. And so I wanted to see if you could address
great
that.
question. If you go back and you trace through the hardening of the heart, who hardens his heart first? Pharaoh hardens his heart first, and then God completes the process. This is similar to what Paul talks about in Romans 1, that if you suppress the truth long enough to go your own way, he's going to give you over to futile thinking to the point where God is going to pull his hand away from that person, and they're going to be given over to their own desires to the point where not only are they doing evil, they're applauding others who are doing evil. And you can see that throughout our society right now, that people are applauding evil. God has given them up because they have willfully turned away from God. Now, one thing we need to understand, when we're reading Exodus, Exodus is written by Moses, who knows the Egyptian culture and theology. If you look at the 10 plagues, just about every one of those plagues, if not all of them, are slams on the Egyptian gods. In fact, Exodus 12 says, I'm going to defeat the Egyptian gods. You know, they had a frog god. You couldn't kill frogs in Egypt. So God said, you want frogs? I'll give you frogs. You know, they had the sun god, Ra. Oh, I'll blot Ra out. Then what? Oh, you think Pharaoh's divine? I'll kill the firstborn. Every one of these plagues were slams on the Egyptian gods. Also, with regard to hardening of the heart, Egyptian theology was this: that a Pharaoh could only make it to the afterlife if his heart was weighed against a feather. If the feather weighed more than the heart, then he would be admitted to the afterlife. But if the heart weighed more than the feather, his heart would be devoured by this creature that was part hippopotamus, part rhinoceros, and part like crocodile or something. Amit, I think its name was, and he wouldn't be admitted to the afterlife. So when Moses is using the term harden the heart, he's basically saying to Pharaoh, by your own theology, you're not going to make it. I'm making your heart heavy, so it's going to outweigh the feather. So when you're reading Exodus, you're reading it from someone who knew the Egyptian culture and the Egyptian theology.
Gotcha. Thank
All
you.
right? Thank you. Good question. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hello, Doctor. My name is Francisco.
Francisco?
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
So this is like something that I've been like struggling for a while. I have seen your videos on like the website for a while. So like I've liked apologetics for a while. But with the issue of grace that I've struggled a lot with, all the spiritual wisdom and scriptural knowledge that any Christian can get through apologetics, how can you not go about engaging all the time with debates and discussions? I personally live in Springfield, Missouri, and there's a lot of like secular and ungodly people there. So many times they just want to be open about talking happiness, like relative truth, and all this stuff. So how do you personally show grace to them without engaging too much in debate and discussion if you actually have a lot of spiritual and biblical knowledge?
I think what we need to do as Christians is to ask a lot of questions, because asking questions is usually not offensive. You're just seeking information. And in this world, right now, Christianity is viewed negatively. So if you just try and talk to people about Jesus all the time, they may put you off. But if you ask them enough questions, you might get to the point of talking about Jesus in a much less offensive way. So you can ask questions when people say things. And this comes from a book called Tactics by my friend Greg Kokel. I don't know if you've seen that book, Francisco, but it's a great book. When someone says something, it's not your job to refute what they say. It's their job to support what they say. So if you're talking to somebody and they say, well, look, I can't believe the Bible. It's been changed throughout the centuries. Don't go into a dissertation as to why it hasn't been changed throughout the centuries. Say, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean it's been changed throughout the centuries? And how did you come to that conclusion? Have you looked into this manuscript evidence for yourself? I guarantee you no one's going to say, yeah, well, just last night I was up reading a book about the Byzantine line of manuscripts, right? People have slogans that they've adopted that they don't even know if they're true. They just like the slogan. And as soon as you ask them for evidence to support the slogan, they're not going to have any evidence. So before they're going to start accepting your worldview, they have to begin to doubt their worldview first. That's why you need to ask questions. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? And then there's another question you can add to that. It starts with, have you ever considered, which is a nice way of you trying to provide evidence back. Have you ever considered that we know the scriptures haven't been changed throughout the centuries because we've got about 6,000 manuscripts from the 2nd century all the way to the time of the printing press. And when we compare those manuscripts, we can reconstruct the original to more than 99% accuracy. So there's no mystery what the original New Testament said, especially on issues of doctrine. We may not know, whether the original manuscript said Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus, but that's not going to change any theology, right? So what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered? Ask a lot of questions. When people say, well, I don't think that's right, you might ask them, by what standard are you saying that's wrong? What's your moral standard? When people say they have a right, you might say, where do rights come from? They don't come from government. A right is something you have regardless of what the government says. A right can only come from God. If there is no God, there are no rights. Everything's just a matter of opinion. Okay? What's the meaning of life? You might want to ask them that. We're just here to be happy. What does that mean? And can I, if hurting other people makes me happy, should I do that? Oh, no, I shouldn't. Why not? Who said? So happiness isn't the standard. There's something beyond happiness. What is it? Just keep asking questions. In fact, Greg Kokel says that now evangelism is a lot less about harvesting and more about gardening. You've got to garden, you've got to plant, you've got to water. God will bring the increase. In fact, Paul even says that. Some plant, some water, God brings the increase. So ask a lot of questions. See if you can get engaged in a conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Thomas.
Thomas, go ahead, sir.
I'll try to arrange this sensically, but you essentially denied a naturalistic conclusion of morality. So God assigned higher ordered values to certain things. A lower order value would be evil, which includes suffering and such on. and that results in virtue, sort of, which correlates to the grandiosity of the evil. So you have this higher order value of free will, which God insisted upon, creating suffering as a necessity for the free will. So in heaven...
Hang on, say that last part again. I didn't quite get that.
Free will is a good thing, essentially, right?
Free will created for what?
Suffering is necessitated by the good of free will, right?
It's not necessitated. We don't have to suffer. But if people use free will for evil,
is
we
there
will.
free will in the absence of suffering?
What's that?
Is there free will in the absence of the ability to suffer?
Is there
or
free
do
will
evil?
In the absence of the ability to suffer? Yeah, we'll have free will in heaven and we won't suffer.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's no suffering there.
No.
So God can create an existence in which there is free will, which is a good, and no suffering.
It's logically possible that God could create a universe where free creatures never chose evil. That's logically possible. It's just not apparently achievable with free creatures, because here's what God can't do. It would be a contradiction. He can't force free creatures to do what he wants, because then they wouldn't be free. So God created a universe where the maximum number of people would choose him and the minimum number of people would go their own way freely.
Okay, so in heaven there could theoretically be a holocaust.
No, because on that side, once we no longer have the sin nature, and we've already gone through this life, there won't be any holocaust. Look, why do we sin now, Thomas? Because we want something good and we'll take a shortcut to get it. When we're in heaven, we're not going to lack anything, and there won't be any necessity to take a shortcut or desire to take a shortcut, and we won't have the sin nature we have now. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Alex.
Alex, go ahead.
Thank you. Fun being short person, but so my sister is currently practicing homosexual, and as a brother, I have failed to have to talk to her about how I feel about her lifestyle and her choices, because I'm afraid of losing my relationship with her, because there's times every time I talk to her, she doesn't really seem like have a stable mindset and stuff. Like, she seems all too happy and things, but
she seems what?
She seems like enjoying the moment, being very happy all the time.
Sure.
Okay, but I feel like if I try and have that conversation with her, she may have a reaction that may cause us to lose our relationship. So my question to you is, how do I gain the courage to talk to her about how I feel about her lifestyle and her choices, even if it does result in losing that relationship with her?
Yeah, I know you said how I feel. How you feel is irrelevant. You're not the moral arbiter of the universe. But I think you can start with this question. What's her name?
Her name is Tatiana.
Tatiana. I would say, Tatiana, if you thought I was going down a road that would hurt me and others, would you love me enough to tell me? What's she going to say? Of course. Do you mind if I do that for you right now? And then explain what you mean. And I know this is difficult in family relationships, but you remember what Jesus said when he said, I did not come to bring unity, I came to bring a sword. I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. Jesus did not come to bring unity in the world. He came to bring unity in the church, but not in the world. He also went on to say, if you don't hate your mother and father in relation to me, you can't be my disciple. Now, he doesn't literally mean hate. It's Mideastern hyperbole to try and say how much your love for God should be, more so than your love for other people. And here's the beauty of it. If you love God more, you're going to love other people more. And unfortunately, in our culture, we think love means approval. Love does not mean approval. Every parent knows this. How many parents do we have in here? All right, how many former children do we have in here? Okay, good. That's all of us then. Question. If your parents approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13, would they have been loving parents? No. No, love does not mean approval. Love means seeking what's best for the other person, and that often requires you to stand in the way of things they want to do. That's what love is. So I might ask her, if I was about to go down the wrong road, would you love me enough to tell me? Yes. Can I do that for you now? Okay. Now, it's more important that you kindly tell her the truth and take any damage from her, any blowback from her, than you be silent. Because that's one of the problems. We're too silent because we think we're loving people by not telling them the truth. That's not the case. In fact, in the passage that everybody reads at their wedding but nobody obeys, 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says, love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. Love rejoices in the truth. Love always protects. Love always perseveres. How do you love people? You want to protect them, which means you have to tell them the truth. And look, it's a hard issue emotionally. It's not a hard issue intellectually. And if you truly love her, you'll find a way to tell her in a calm moment and say, I don't want this to affect our relationship in a negative way, but I'm willing to take any blowback you give me because I love you. Thomas Sowell said something very profound. Let me show you the quote. Because Sowell said everything well, still says it, at 93 years old. If I can find it, if I have it here. I don't know if I do. I don't have it here. But he said, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. And we often tell people what they want to hear. Why? Because we're protecting ourselves, aren't we? In fact, Jesus gave us one new command, as you know. He said, love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us. When we tell people what they want to hear, we're sacrificing them to help us because we don't want to take the blowback. When we tell people what they need to hear, we're sacrificing ourselves to help them. That's what we need to do. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
I'm Josh.
Josh, go ahead.
Nice to meet you. I have a question for you. According to the Bible, God grants us free will. The Bible also states that God has predestined those he foreknew and knows the plans he has for us, as stated in Romans 8:29 through 30 and also in Jeremiah 29:11. Can they both be supported equally in the Bible without contradicting one another?
Yes, because just because God knows what we're going to do doesn't mean we have no free will. Look, here's the problem. People think that knowledge implies causation. I know that the sun's going to rise tomorrow in the east, but I'm not causing it to rise in the east. Right? A woman that puts down her newborn baby in bed when she brings the baby home from the hospital knows that at some point that baby's going to wake up and want to eat. But she's not causing the baby to wake up and want to eat because she knows the baby's going to do it, right? That baby's freely waking up. And the same thing is true with God. Since he knows all things, it's unavoidable that no matter what universe he creates, he knows the outcome. But knowing the outcome doesn't mean he's a puppet master causing us to do what we do. He just knows in advance what we're freely going to do. So he knew in this world you would be here asking this question and I'd be trying to answer it ineffectively. And he knew that last night the Eagles would beat the Dolphins, right? But they were still freely playing the game, and we're still freely interacting right now, right? Even though God knows what we're going to do. By the way, I think a lot of times when you read the term predestined in the Bible, it doesn't mean you don't have a choice. It just means the outcome is guaranteed. When you are in Christ, you're guaranteed to be conformed to the image of his Son. You're guaranteed to be a child of God. You're guaranteed ultimately to be glorified. That's what the word means. It doesn't mean you don't have a choice. It means because God is who he is and you're now one of his children, you're guaranteed to be an heir to the throne. Doesn't mean you don't have a choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I guess layman's term, predestined doesn't take away free will.
No, of course not. No, just because God knows what we're going to do, he knows. I mean, you could use another illustration. Suppose right now there's a football game on, 49ers and the Vikings or something, okay? Let's suppose that you're DVR in the game right now, and you want to go home when this is over and watch it. But you don't want to know the score. Yet on the way home, your friend texts you the score, and you go, I didn't want to know the score. I just wanted to go home and watch it as if it were live. So you go home and you turn it on, and you know the outcome. Does that mean because you know the outcome, the players don't have free will? No, the players are still freely doing what they're doing. You just know what they're going to do. Same thing is true for God. All right?
Thank you.
All right, good question. By the way, there are books out there. My co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, wrote a book called Chosen But Free. You might want to check that out. Also, John Lennox has a book not long ago called Determined to Believe, ? And also, there's a YouTube channel that my friend Leighton Flowers runs. It's called Soteriology 101. I know it's a long name. Soteriology 101, and he deals with the Calvinism issue at great length there. So check that out. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Logan.
Logan, go ahead, sir.
Logan. We see in the Bible that there was justified killing, such as the Canaanites, because they unjustifiedly killed people. Mm-hmm. We would say today that killing terrorists are justified because they've killed people. Would it be justified to torture, to get more information, to stop more terrorists?
This is a hard question, but let me give you what our military does, okay? Because I was in the Navy. And I don't know if you're probably too young to remember, but back in the right after 9/11, the military in Iraq and elsewhere would catch terrorists and waterboard them. You know what waterboarding is? You just kind of invert somebody, you pour water in their nose, and they think they're drowning, even though they're not. And you waterboard somebody a couple times, they're going to tell you anything. All right? Now, it doesn't leave any permanent physical damage. This was done in some of the training I went through. I personally wasn't waterboarded, but the guy next to me was. We do this in our training, and yet there were people claiming that this should not be done to terrorists. Now, this is an ethical quandary, it is, but if you're in a conflict, what's called a moral dilemma, and you have really good evidence to believe that this terrorist has information that if he gives it to you is going to save thousands of people, you have a greater duty to save those thousands of people than you do to keep a terrorist comfortable. I think you can make him uncomfortable, not torture where you're cutting things off him, that kind of thing. You can make him uncomfortable in order to give you the information you need. The same thing is true if you're Nazi Germany and you're hiding Jews in your attic and you get a knock at the door. Schnell! Schnell! You come to the door, there are Nazi soldiers there. Hast du hier Juden? What are you going to do? What are you people going to say? You have Jews here. 9? You're going to lie? You sinner! It says, thou shalt not bear false witness. And here you are. You're supposed to submit to the governing authorities. That's what Romans 13 says. It doesn't say that. How many are going to lie? How many are going to tell the truth? Okay, you all passed the test. Why? Because you have a greater duty to protect innocent life than you do to tell the truth to a guilty murderer. And there are examples of this in the scriptures. I'll just rattle through some of them very quickly. Rahab, the Hebrew midwives, even before Rahab. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The apostles. We must obey God rather than men. Remember they said, don't preach the gospel anymore? I said, sorry, we got to preach. We're going to disobey you because we have a greater duty to preach the gospel. Now, this has to be done advisedly. You don't just, decide all the time that, I have a greater reason. No, it really has to be the fact that you're in a real hard dilemma And you therefore have a greater obligation to protect innocent life than to tell the truth to a guilty murderer to keep a terrorist comfortable. So that would be my answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. By the way, there's more on that in a book called Christian Ethics, also written by Dr. Norman Geisler, a great book on these issues. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Dalen.
Say again?
Dalen.
Dalen, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. In heaven, there's not going to be any tears, no sorrow.
Uh-huh.
How are we going to feel, or how are we going to view the scars of Jesus?
The scars of Jesus, I think, with great appreciation, with the kind of praise he should get for taking our punishment on himself. Yeah.
It'll just all be glory. There won't be any sadness involved with it.
Well, you know what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, we had it up there earlier, our light and momentary afflictions will achieve for us a greater weight of glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, for what is seen is temporary. We fix our eyes on what is unseen, for what is unseen is eternal. And it was, I think, Mother Teresa who famously said that looking back at this life compared to the glory we will see would be like spending one night in an inconvenient hotel. Okay? Because the amount of glory that we're going to be witnessing and in heaven will cause our negative memories of this life to be overwhelmed. In fact, even in Lord of the Rings, what does Sam say to Gandalf?
I don't know.
Is it true? He says something like, is it true that, how does he put it? All evil or all suffering will become untrue in light of heaven. In fact, my son and I wrote a book called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. And we point out that the top movie franchises of the past 50 years have all stolen from the greatest story ever told, including Lord of the Rings, including Star Wars, including Harry Potter, including Batman and Iron Man and all these great stories. They're taking elements from the Christian story.
So those scars will just be completely viewed as badges of honor.
Yes.
And all negative.
It's not sad.
Right.
Why is it sad? I mean, what he did, I mean, it was sad that he went through that.
Oh, I know,
but the outcome.
I know, but all the suffering will be removed from our...
It will pale in comparison. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 11 or 12, I want to say it's 11, where it says that some underwent tremendous suffering and will achieve a greater resurrection. Look at Hebrews chapter 11. Some were sawn in two. Some say that Isaiah was sawn in half, and he will achieve a greater resurrection. He's going to get a greater crown of glory for going through the difficulty he went through here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dalen. Yes. Yes, sir.
Hi. So I have a friend back home that...
What's your name?
Jonah.
Joe?
Jonah.
Jonah, go ahead, sir.
So I have a friend back home that's dating this girl. She's not Christian, and so we've brought it to his attention, just saying, hey, you should probably have a talk with her about her religion if it's important to you.
Is he a Christian?
Do what?
Is he a Christian?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he, I'm pretty sure he had the conversation with her, but since then, she has become more, she's grown more insecurity, also like rolling her eyes anytime he even mentions Jesus, or also like, I forget the name of this singer, but like she's defending this singer who's like worshiping Satan and like just coming out and straight up saying that.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying there's no warning signs here?
Yeah, basically. And so I brought it up to him, and I'm like, hey, dude, last time I was a little bit more nice, but like, you kind of got to look at this, and what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. And all he can bring up is just saying, like, I'm not going to marry her until I find out that she's Christian, but like, what do I say? Because obviously he should not really be with her at this time.
Well, he's obviously playing with fire here. Mm-hmm. Because if he does get attached to her, he's going to probably overlook the moral and theological requirement, the one moral and theological requirement that the Bible gives us for whom we marry, and that is just marry somebody in the Lord. Look, marriage is hard enough when you're equally yoked. It's even going to be more difficult when you're unequally yoked. And he's setting himself up for a lot of pain and suffering in the future. Not to mention he's disobeying the Scriptures. But practically, he's setting himself up for a lot of pain and suffering. Look, you put two broken people in one relationship, there's going to be trouble. Even if you are both Christians. So make life easier and marry a Christian. You'll also be obeying what Christ has told you. That's the most important thing. So I would just point that out to him. It's not going to end well. And he shouldn't obviously be disobeying what the Scriptures say. And by the way, it would be an interesting question to ask her, if I were him, to say to her, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If she hesitates or says no, nothing else you can do but walk away.
Yeah, she grew up in a Christian family from what I was told. But like over the years, she's just become more chasing like self-pleasure and stuff like that. So
right.
We should have an open mind.
Well, she might have been brought up in a false version of Christianity, thinking that Christianity is all about rules and regulations, when in fact Christianity is about accepting a free gift that Christ has provided for you, and then out of gratitude for what he's done for you, you choose to follow him. So she may have been brought up in a legalistic culture, and she goes, I don't want any of that. Okay, I get that, but that's not Christianity. In fact, that's what Paul's harping on in the whole book of Galatians. You're adding all these rules and regulations. Why? So, if you love this guy, and apparently you do, you might want to say the same thing that we said earlier. If you were about to go down the wrong road, would you love me? If I was about to go down the wrong road, would you love me enough to tell me? All right?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Great question, Jonah. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, Frank. Josh.
Josh, go ahead, sir.
Big fan.
Thank you, sir.
Followed you for years. 3 questions, if I can. Be a little selfish with the mic. Number one is going back to pain. In Genesis 3:16, God says, "I will increase your pain," to Eve. Was there pain originally in the Garden of Eden?
I don't know.
Okay.
It doesn't appear, but
okay.
You know,
if so, it would kind of lend to your argument that ultimately pain will serve a greater good. But okay, so
yeah.
No answer. And then another one is, do you think it is possible, because of common grace, that we've never actually felt the full weight of pain ever? We don't have a perfect brain, we don't have perfect nerve endings, we don't have perfect emotions yet. Do you think that once we're resurrected and have those things perfected in our bodies, in our minds, in our emotions and chemicals, that should terrify us even more about hell? Because now we'll feel hell to a perfection that we've never felt any pain. And we'll feel elation in heaven to a degree that we've never felt any joy here on earth.
Probably, but we're doing some speculation here. You're probably right about that. Look, either way, whether hell is worse than we think or better than we think or whatever, not as severe as we think is a better way of putting it, I don't want to go there. Right? But God is going to be just. There's going to be degrees of punishment in hell, just like there's going to be degrees of rewards in heaven. So you are going to be, your entry into heaven is based on what Christ has done for you, but the rewards are based on what you've done for him. Okay? The same thing is true with regard to hell. If you've not accepted the free gift of salvation, you're going to get justice. And it wouldn't be fair of God to punish, say, a normal unbeliever at the same level of torment as, say, Hitler. That wouldn't be just.
True.
So you're going to be getting the perfect amount of judgment and the perfect amount of reward depending upon where you go.
And then last question, it's a sidebar, but have you pursued Dr. Tim Stratton's argument about the God of deception?
I don't know. Tim does videos for us at crossexamine.org or the YouTube channel. I don't know if I've heard his argument, so I can't comment on it. But Tim's a great guy. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Doc.
All right, thanks so much. Yes, sir, all the way from Muskegon, Michigan.
Yeah, visited there over the summer. My name's Steven.
Hey, Steven, go ahead, sir.
So I don't think it's pretty obvious. You look at the world around us that it has become polarized on about every issue. I think politics, we're just completely divided on this side. And I also think, sadly, that has become an issue that has infiltrated the church. I think you see both sides fall into this trap of preaching politics from the pulpit. And I guess my question to you is, how do we, as we go out and preach the gospel and go out and fulfill the Great Commission, that we don't fall into the trap of letting worldly things such as politics influence our messaging?
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you. I think politics ought to influence our messaging based on our theology. Our politics comes from our theology. Our theology doesn't come from our politics. People get that the wrong way. Some people are more Republican or Democrat than they are whatever they believe, right?
Yeah.
I'm a conservative because I want to conserve what's right and true.
Yeah.
But I'm a conservative because I'm a Christian. I'm not a Christian because I'm a conservative. Okay? So I think Christians ought to be involved in every area of life. Politics, business, medicine, media, law, education, every area of life Christians ought to be involved. The whole road is the Christian road because we care about people, and if we're going to love our neighbor, we ought to advocate for laws that are going to protect our neighbor. If we don't do so, who is going to do it? And I know there's a lot of pastors out there who say, look, I don't preach these issues, I just preach the gospel. There's a couple things they don't seem to realize. The laws that are made in Washington, the laws that are made in Columbia, right? Missouri?
City.
Oh, Jefferson City, that's right. The laws that are made in Washington, the laws that are made in your state capital, Jefferson City, the laws that are made locally, right here in Maryville, those laws affect your ability to preach and live the gospel. If you don't think so, you can go to some of the countries I've been to. I've been to Iran. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I've been to China. Can we do what we're doing in this room right now in those countries?
No.
No, legally they've ruled it out. There's no First Baptist Church of Riyadh. Okay? Because Saudi Arabia prohibits churches through politics. And so if we think the gospel is important, and we do, we have to be involved to protect religious freedom and religious expression. Also, we have to be involved to love our neighbor, to put laws in place because we don't want people to get hurt. And the reason the government's involved, according to both Genesis 9 and Romans 13, is to protect innocent people from evil. And right now, we're not protecting innocent people from evil when we allow people to kill their children or to mutilate their children. And yet, that's what's going on in our country right now. So, I understand your concern. Yeah. When people are more about politics than they are about Jesus, that's a problem.
Okay.
However, what we believe about Jesus and the truth ought to inform what we do politically, and we have to be engaged because atheists alone are not qualified to run the country. Yeah. All of us should be involved in politics, whether you're an atheist, Christian, or anywhere in between. Yeah. All right?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Stephen. Yes, sir.
My name is Mason.
What's your name?
Mason.
Mason, go ahead.
So I was leading a small group, and we were studying the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, and someone brought up the question of why did Jesus wait for 2 days to go to Bethany?
4 days.
4 days.
Yeah.
And so it's to my understanding that since Jesus is part of the Godhead, he's all-knowing, correct?
Well, in his divine nature, yes.
So they predict that by the time the messenger got to Jesus, that Lazarus was already dead. So I have a hard time reckoning why did Jesus wait those 4 days?
Well, it doesn't say why, but it could be just to make sure that everybody knew he was dead. So when he did rise him from the dead, nobody would say, he wasn't quite dead yet. Okay. Could have been. We're speculating. It doesn't tell us why. Mm-hmm. He delayed. And then he was able to come in, and everybody knew that Lazarus had been dead for a while, so when he raised him from the dead, everyone knew it was a true resurrection. He wasn't quite dead yet.
Thank you.
All right, good question. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
Hi, my name's Anna.
Anna?
Anna.
Go ahead.
Yeah. As much as you're willing to share, I was curious to ask you, what's your testimony? Like, how did God change your life?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey, and so I was Catholic because it's the law. You're either Catholic or Jewish, and I went to Catholic high school, learned a lot, but I never really understood who Jesus was. And when I went into the Navy after college, I met the son of a Methodist minister, and I had so many questions for him. He finally said, look, you just need to get Josh McDowell books, Evidence Demands a Verdict and More Than a Carpenter. And when I read those books, I said, wow, this is true. When I got out of the Navy, I met the man who actually taught Josh McDowell a lot of what he put in those books. His name was Norman Geisler, and he was starting a seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so my wife and I were, with 3 kids, 5 and under, moved from the D.C. area to Charlotte, North Carolina 30 years ago to attend Southern Evangelical Seminary, ses.edu/Frank. And the promo code is PILLOW. No, I'm just kidding. All right. And so I became a Christian in the Navy, and when I got out of the Navy, when I met Norman Geisler, we went to seminary. So I came to faith through evidence. I was always interested. I always knew there was a God. There had to be a first cause. I always knew that. I just didn't really know who Jesus was until I got those books and realized what Christianity was true. And then when I went to seminary, I learned obviously a lot more.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes,
Hello.
ma'am. What's
My
your name?
name is Angela.
Angela, go ahead.
What advice would you give to help someone persuade an individual who is not a believer that is not a good idea to live with a girlfriend or boyfriend and have sex outside of marriage?
When someone is, this person's a Christian?
One is and one is not.
Okay, well, I would ask them why they think it is a good idea and see what they say. Look, when somebody is believing something that's wrong, it's not your job to refute them. It's your job to ask them enough questions so they have to affirm it. They have to give you evidence as to why it is a good idea.
Right.
Okay? So I would ask them, why do you think this is good?
So many times it seems like in our culture, people use the excuse, it's, finances. Finances is always a big hot topic. It's easier because, you can't afford to live on your own and blah, blah, blah. So I just feel like there's a lot.
You could use those same lines of arguments for prostitution.
True.
Or drug use.
Yes.
Drug dealing. Can't afford this unless I get this money. I mean, you could justify anything.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So you might want to just point that out. But look, if they're Christians, a question I might ask them is, if Jesus wanted you to be sexually pure until marriage, would you follow him? And see what they say. If they hesitate or say no, it's not about Jesus, it's about them. Now, from just a sort of common sense perspective, if you just put the scriptures aside, let's say they don't believe in the scriptures. If you look practically, the people that cohabitate before they get married have a much higher divorce rate. Now, is that because they cohabitated beforehand? Or is it because they already were the kind of people that would cohabitate, and therefore they're just the kind of people that don't like commitment?
True.
Okay, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know which way the causal arrow goes, and maybe it's different for everybody, right? The second thing you might say to them: love, by definition, binds itself. If somebody says, "I love you, but I'm not ready to commit," they're lying. Not that they're not ready to commit, but they don't love you.
Right.
Because if they truly did love you, they would want what's best for you. And what's best for you? A commitment forever. Not, I'm going to use you as long as I can until somebody else comes along I like better. And I know in our culture we think sex is just physical. But if you think about this, sex is not just physical. If sex were just physical, why is it worse when somebody rapes you than when somebody just physically assaults you. Because sex isn't just physical. It's emotional, it's psychological, it's spiritual, it's biological, it's moral. There's so much more to sex than just the physical. And yet we try and make it just about the physical. And we know it's much more than that. If you have sex with somebody, everything changes forever. And we all know this. In fact, I know of a woman, she's now a woman, but when she was a child, she was sexually abused by a friend of the family for 10 years. For a long period of time, she was in a rehab facility at $15,000 a month for counseling. If sex is just physical, why was she in that rehab facility at $15,000 a month? Because it's not just physical. There's so much more to it, and we treat it like it's just casual. Like, oh, I like you tonight, you know. I'll call you maybe tomorrow. No. There's much more to it, and everyone sitting in this room knows that, but we don't want to believe it because we want to go our own way.
Right.
So just ask a lot of questions.
Okay, thank you.
All right? Thank you. Hey, what's your name?
Hello, I'm Weston.
Weston, go ahead, sir.
You mentioned earlier in one of your questions that you grew up Catholic.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering if you don't mind me asking or answering why you, if you left the church or why you left the church.
Well, let me put it this way. My mom's Catholic. My mom's saved. She knows what salvation is. I have a lot of respect for the Catholic Church. Some of the greatest theologians of all time were Catholic, like Thomas Aquinas. And John Paul II was a great theologian. Ratzinger, Benedict, great theologian. But even they were beginning to admit that the Protestants have it right, that Luther had something right here, that we're saved by grace. You see the difference, the general big picture difference between Roman Catholics and evangelicals is that Roman Catholics, or let me put it another way, Protestants, evangelicals, believe you're justified, and that's instantaneous. As soon as you believe, due to the blood of Christ, you're saved. Then starts the big, long process of sanctification when you get closer and closer to Jesus, even though you never quite make it completely. You still have the sin nature. That happens in glorification, that you are conformed to the image of a son. Right now, you're kind of going up and down doing that. Roman Catholics tend to put those two things together. And that's why they say, yes, grace is necessary, but you also have to do these works. Where Protestants are saying, you don't have to do these works, but you will do these works if you truly are saved. You're saved by faith alone, but your faith is not alone. But the works don't have any merit in the sense that they rescue you from your sin. They simply are meritorious in the sense that you're going to get rewards for it. Okay? So there's a confusion there. And unfortunately, back in history, back in the Council of Trent in the 1500s AD, after Luther in 1517 nailed the 95 Theses to the door at the church in Wittenberg, Germany, and said that this idea that we have to do good works in order to be saved, and you have to give indulgences to the church to build St. Peter's Cathedral, that's not in the Scriptures. That's not right. And then a little bit later, the Council of Trent, the Roman Catholic Church, doubled down on what they were saying and made the Apocrypha, those books that were never accepted by the Jews as part of their Old Testament. The Roman Catholic Church officially put them in the Catholic Old Testament, and some of those books talked about meritorious works. So that's where all this came to head in the 1500s. But I will say this. conservative Protestants and conservative Catholics have more in common with one another than they do with their liberal counterparts. In other words, conservatives have more in common with one another than, say, a conservative Protestant and a liberal Protestant. A liberal Protestant hardly even believes in God. You know, they're hymn-singing Rotary clubs, right? And a liberal Catholic and a conservative Catholic, they don't have much in common either. But a conservative Catholic and a conservative Protestant have much more in common. We agree on many of the essentials. We do disagree on some of these important issues, but we agree on many of the essentials. Last thing I'll say about this, well, two things. First of all, the book that you want to get, if you really want to see where they agree and where they disagree, is a book called Roman Catholics and Evangelicals, Agreements and Differences, by Norman Geisler and Mackenzie. Last name is Mackenzie. I'm trying to think of his first name right now. In any event, 25 years old, but still a great book, endorsed by both Protestants and Roman Catholics. Okay? But let me just say this from my personal perspective. I've been to hundreds of masses in my life. Hundreds. I never heard the gospel until the last mass I went to, and that was my father's funeral. The priest got up and said, I talked to Frank the other day. He's accepted Jesus as his Lord and Savior, so he's with Jesus now. He knew the gospel, but that's the only time in my life I ever heard the gospel in a Roman Catholic church. Now, maybe there's exceptions. There probably are. But in my experience, I haven't heard it. How about yours? Have you ever heard that you're saved by grace through faith in a Roman Catholic service?
Maybe not in the sense that you're speaking, but yes.
Okay, good. Well, I hope more priests are doing that, because that's the essence of it. Look, if you can be saved by good works, why did Jesus come? There's no reason for Jesus if we can be saved by good works. This is why Paul says in Galatians 2 that if righteousness could be achieved by observing the law, then Christ died in vain. There's no reason for Jesus if you can just be good and make it to heaven.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I do disagree that the Catholic Church says you need works in order. I would say that the Catholic Church believes that you need Jesus in order for those works to matter. But
yes, that's true. Here's the problem. Theologically, there are ways to show that the Roman Catholic Church distinguishes between justification and sanctification. But practically, at the pew level, hardly any Catholic knows this.
Sadly,
right?
I agree with you.
Yeah. They don't know it. They think, I got to be good to get to heaven. They think it's all about works. That's why, growing up, I didn't know who Jesus was. He's hanging on the church wall, and I just didn't get it. Never explained. So that's just where I came from.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Great
nice
question.
Meeting you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name's Jeremy.
Yes, Jeremy.
2 years ago, you was here. There was a young lady, Macy, that asked you a question, kind of towards the end, and I'm inspired to ask the same question. Can I pray for you and these good folks here tonight?
Sure. Let's close it out with prayer. Go ahead,
All right,
sir.
Let's do that.
Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we bow our heads and our hearts before you, Lord, and give you praise. We thank you for your love and for your grace and for your mercy, which has been poured out into your creation. Everything that is and was and will be is yours. Father, there's oftentimes a lot of things in life that we don't understand and that we struggle with, but we trust in you. So, Father, I pray, I give you praise and thanks for bringing Frank to us tonight, the message that he has shared. I give you praise and thanks for those that have attended, that are filling this auditorium. And I just pray a blessing upon them. Lord, I pray that your Spirit would move mightily in them and through them, and that your light would shine into a world that just seems to be laden with darkness. Father, I pray all of this so that you would be glorified through our lives, and that your love would manifest itself in the communities in the lives of those around us. Again, Lord Jesus, we give you praise and thanks in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jeremy. Hey, last thing, friends. Tomorrow night, we're going to be down the road in St. Joseph's at Western Missouri State. Missouri Western. Yeah. And we're going to be doing I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, so it's a different presentation. So if you want to see that, you're welcome. Anyone's welcome. We'll also be streaming it right here on the YouTube channel. And then on Thursday night, I know it's a ways from here, but we'll be at Auburn University. So anybody out there can watch that as well. Thank you, folks. Thanks for being here.